The Titanic still haunts us from the depths of the Atlantic Ocean, the most well-known, well-documented shipwreck in history. What is less known is that this is not the most tragic. In this country, that infamous distinction belongs to a steamship called the Sultana.
The best guess is that the remains of the Sultana are on this peninsula that's right out here.
Kay Brockwell of the Marion Chamber of Commerce has become local authority on what is perhaps the saddest story you'll ever hear. It was April 1865. Lee had surrendered to Grant at Appomattox. The war between the states was over. These are the faces of Union soldiers freed from prison camps just days after the fighting stopped. Men who should have gotten home. Instead, they got on the Sultana.
Steamboat captains received 50 cents for each enlisted man that they carried north and $2 for every officer. If you could put more men on your steamboat, obviously you made more money.
The Sultana and similar sidewheelers like this one were built to hold only about 400 passengers.
By all accounts, somewhere between 2,200 and 2,500 soldiers were loaded on the Sultana in Vicksburg.
Dangerously overcrowded, they headed slowly north against a flooded Mississippi, powered by a boiler already unfit for service.
It had a crack, it had a leak. They had called a mechanic to fix the boiler at Vicksburg. The mechanic says the boiler needs to be replaced.
Ship's captain Cass Mason, pressed for time, had it patched instead of replaced. This is the only known photo of the Sultana, taken during a stop at Helena, the ship overflowing with POWs longing for family.
The boat actually almost capsized at that point from all the soldiers coming to the side where the photographer was to be in the photo.
In the wee hours of April the 27th, just 5 miles north of Memphis, their journey ended.
That's when the boiler gave way. The boiler exploded, blew the stern half of the steamboat off, disintegrated it. Flames from the firebox started consuming the boat above the waterline. Soldiers, passengers who were not killed in the explosion or drowned immediately began jumping from the boat if they hadn't already been blown into the water, began finding pieces of debris to hang on to and float their way back downstream. Most people didn't swim in those days.
The river swallowed them by the hundreds.
Bodies washed up for days as far south as Helena. The best guess is somewhere between 1,500 and 1,800 people.
Miraculously, there were survivors. Marion Mayor Frank Fogelman had ancestors who lived and worked on the Arkansas side of the river. They rescued who they could.
They spent the better part of the night and part of the next day rescuing people from treetops and people that were clinging to parts of the wreckage of the Sultana.
It was a horrible disaster, but it happened in a country that had just experienced the death of 600,000 people in the war between the states. So it got little notice.
Not much has changed. There are a few memorials like this one in Memphis's Elmwood Cemetery. Just a simple marker with that fateful night described and inscribed in stone.
They had survived the worst the war could throw at them, but they couldn't survive what the river threw at them.
What is left of the Sultana may indeed be here, buried underneath 35 feet of silt in Crittenden County. Few have ever thought to look for it. It should at least be remembered, the shipwreck story more cruelly Titanic than any other. We owe it to all those soldiers who almost made it home. Steve Powell, All About Arkansas.
And Steve tells us there were a few women and children on the Sultana. They did not survive. The captain of the steamboat was also killed. Now, there have been several books written on the disaster that are still available. The city of Marion also has dedicated its own monument to those who died.